Welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. We're so happy that you're joining us today as we continue to explore different Catholic topics. Last week we had quite a spicy episode with our COVID-19 vaccine. Today we're continuing with another spicy topic, so stay tuned. And of course, my name is Father Tiali, but joined always by the two people who don't get in trouble for the things that they say. Is Josh Sullivan over here.
Hello.
And the most popular person on our podcast, as told by the emails and fan mail we get, is Matt Van Milligan. Matt,
Hello.
welcome to you. And it's so true because our podcast is actually, what is it, Josh? It's one
Top 10% of all podcasts released in North America.
That's right.
That's pretty cool.
Amazing? I know it is pretty cool. Who would have thought?
I definitely wouldn't. Not my family or my wife, let me tell you.
The largest critics of our podcast are the ones closest to us, right? Yeah, don't let the success go to our heads, right? Yeah. I mean, my head's large enough. Like, look at the size of it, right? I mean, we have to stay humble in our ministry. But really, it's been a blessing to do the podcast.
I've learned a lot.
Yeah, I know. I have learned a lot. It's so true.
And it's fun to get together and chat. And you said in an early episode that, you know, this is probably what we'd be doing kind of pre-COVID, just sitting around.
Yeah, with beer and wings.
Yeah, beer and wings. But, you know,
and wings
this
in
is
our
just,
hand.
we have...
and remember the gift you got at Christmas time.
Oh, yes. The Baileys.
That's
right. That was very nice.
That's right. From Bruce and Sue, they sent all of us a bottle of Baileys. That's so nice.
That was great.
Of them. It didn't last long.
No.
It didn't last long.
Christmas morning, I think.
Christmas. That's soon. Hey?
And I don't drink coffee.
So
let's just put that out there.
Last week we talked about COVID-19 vaccines, and it was quite a lively discussion. I learned a lot about the science behind it that you shared. And I didn't know all the details there. So we're going to respond to people's reactions to that on another episode, because today we're talking about something that happened a few weeks ago, but we haven't really addressed it on the Catholic Buzz. We are today, which might lead us into other discussions too, and that is that around I think it was December, just at the middle of December there, that the Pope announced that he was changing the Code of Canon Law to allow women in the Church to be installed formally, as lectors and acolytes. So this caught the attention of lots of media,
of course,
because it
Pope,
was like,
women,
the church is yes, and
all the keywords.
So let's just start by explaining what exactly the Pope did here.
Yeah.
Okay. So he basically said that because for us in Canada, it might not make sense.
I was going to say, I've seen women, for me, a lectern and an acolyte. So that growing up, for me, as an altar server, I saw lectors were the people that read the book.
Yes.
Read from the book.
Yeah.
And read the readings, the first
scriptures.
readings, second readings, the scriptures. And an acolyte I was told at one time, was somebody who altar served and carried a candle. And that was my definition of it. But I understand that that's not the case. And we'll get into that, I think, right? But I've seen women do both those jobs. So that's nothing new to me, having seen them do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is why it caused a little bit of confusion for people to see this in the headlines. Like, and to be very basic, some people might say, "Oh wow, the church is finally allowing women to read." Like, you know what I mean? Like, good for that. It's 2021. You know what I mean? But why the Pope said this? Because the Code of Canon Law that was in question actually said. It's Canon 230, for those of you who like canon law. And it said that lay men could be instituted by the means of an established liturgical rite to the ministries of lectors and acolyte. Okay, why does canon law say this? Because in practice, like you said, women have been taking the role of a lector and serving at the altar as well. This is discussing something that's more of a formal installation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And prior to this announcement by the Pope, a formal installation was only reserved to men, although some places in Canada have done it anyways, right? And the reason why it was reserved to men was because these were ministries that were seen as sort of another
A stepping
key
stone,
moment
yeah.
or stepping stone on the way to becoming a priest,
Okay.
which is reserved for men alone.
Gotcha.
So, for example, I'll use myself. When I was in the seminary, when it became time at the end of my first year of theological studies, I was officially installed or instituted in a liturgical ceremony with the bishop present, the Bishop of London, as a lector. Even though I was 27 or 28 years old and had been a lector in my parish all my since I was 14. But in this ceremony, I was officially installed as a lector, carried with the task to be someone who reads the scriptures regularly and proclaims it, not just at Mass, but also be someone who talks about the scriptures, often.
Yeah.
And you were formed, and I remember they kind of passed you this.
There's a whole
the
ceremony.
Scriptures,
Yeah.
and the bishop was there, and so that was my first key moment on the way to the priesthood. And every year after that was another one. So after my second year of theological studies, it was an acolyte, which is someone who assists the priest at Mass.
At the altar. Okay.
I had been in altar service since I was a boy.
Yeah.
But this was an officially mandated installation with the bishop present that on my way to priesthood, I had acquired this. The church officially recognizes me as an acolyte. So now, in the absence of a priest or deacon, I am the next in line to distribute the Eucharist, for example, right? At Mass and to assist the priest at Holy Mass.
And these were prior to your ordination.
Prior to my ordination.
Because I think that's where people get a bit confused or a bit lost or a bit because for all the reasons you mentioned, that like people hear this, it's like, oh, finally allowing women into ministries that they've actually had access to for some time or have been eligible for.
Exactly.
And I think we really need to clearly distinguish between kind of lay ministries and ordained ministries, because while this was kind of a formal step on the way to you becoming a priest, it's prior to your ordination. It's
Yes.
not. You're still operating
part of holy
within
orders.
even though that's your intention, you're still operating within a lay context.
Exactly.
I mean, there's an interesting kind of historical trajectory, because when you're talking about canon law, when you're talking about church practice, that in the Western Church and still in the Eastern Church up until Vatican II, I believe, you still had kind of minor orders.
Yeah.
You didn't have that same clarity of distinction between kind of lay ministries and ordained ministries, because you had that progression. You could be a sub-deacon. You could be with those changes that came, this recent kind of clarification is kind of following on kind of the changes that happened with the establishment of the permanent diaconate, with having extraordinary ministers of the Eucharist, which wasn't a very popular thing. Like you didn't have lay people
Touching the Eucharist with their hands.
administering the sacraments without kind of like a great situation or like really, really specific ecclesial direction or permission.
So now,
True.
the bishop, can the bishop make that decree, or has the bishop made that decree in the past where he allows women then to take on these roles in lay ministry versus what it says in the law, which is men, but he can give them like temporary or whatever that, like there's something about that, right?
Yeah, even within canon law, this I know people want to paint with broad strokes and kind of ignore the nuance in the history, but this isn't a substantial change. That this even within canon law, even though it's kind of practically what a lot of dioceses have been doing for some time, that permission was given to formally install these people in these ministries since the 80s, since the early 80s.
Right.
Yeah, and you can go into kind of the reasons for that there a clear distinction between kind of the sacramental duties of a priest and what the lay people are actually capable of doing and actually able to contribute to.
And I think that's what in Pope Francis's statement or decree or motu proprio, right? We know that word, right? Motu proprio that he released about this. He was talking about the role of the baptized, right? And how all of us are baptized priest, prophet, and king. That's our baptismal call, right? All of us share that as a Christian. But there's a difference between the baptized priesthood and the ministerial priesthood. But all of us who share in the common priesthood of the baptized do have the opportunity to offer our gifts, right? To proclaim the word of God at these celebrations, to assist during liturgies. Or all that. That's part of our our
mandate.
Our mandate as a baptized Christian to assist the church, to love the scriptures, to proclaim. And that's what he focused on when he released his motu proprio about allowing women to be officially installed in these two ministries. And I just want to go back to what you said too, that there is a history here because these are now seen as ministries, right? And
not orders.
And not orders.
Gotcha.
And so that's why at a time this was only reserved to people, like I was saying about my own experience, on the way to priesthood, because they were seen as orders. There was tonsure, right? Which I got naturally.
Yeah.
That's when they cut the top of your hair here. Yeah.
Me too. They just went a little far.
But I naturally got the So, but it's cool. But okay. Side note about the tonsure. You know why they used to cut the top of your hair like that?
Was it vanity? No, I don't know.
Yeah,
It was.
It was an outward showing that you are now renouncing sort of the outside world and focusing now on the inside.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I think it was kind of cool.
That's why you take your hat off too. Actually, in the Catholic Church, you take your hat off to show your bald spot. Women wear hats. A lot of times in the older tradition, they would wear hats or veils, cover themselves up to cover their vanity, versus men take off their hat to show their bald spot to show that they're not insane. Yeah. Same idea.
I know that.
One of the traditions.
Okay, so there was tonsure, there was porter,
Yeah.
someone who would literally open the doors of the church, ring the bells, like kind of like
Quasimodo or brother
I
Andre
was
as well,
thinking Brother Andre.
Yeah.
Matt says Quasimodo.
Hunchback.
You said ring the bells.
Yes.
In
I
my
did
defense,
say-
yeah.
And that was it. The
Yeah.
porter rang the bells at
Yeah.
the appropriate time of the Divine Liturgy and opened the doors for people to
Yeah.
come in. Poor Saint Andre.
Yeah, I thought you were setting up for Quasimodo, actually.
Quasimodo. Okay, so the tonsure, porter, lector, exorcist was one of
That's
the minor
crazy.
orders that someone on the road to priesthood could participate in an exorcism, because the power of deliverance and all that stuff. Then there was subdeacon. Then that was it for minor orders. Then it was the ordained ministries of deacon and priest, right? So at Vatican II, those minor orders were eliminated and replaced with these ministries.
Gotcha.
Lector, acolyte. The next one is candidacy, which means the bishop calls you officially. You are now a candidate to receive the holy orders, right? And then diaconate, deacon, and priesthood. So now that they're no longer minor orders, and they're just ministries, that is kind of our call of the baptized to participate in these ministries like we do in so many other
Makes
ministries
sense.
as well.
Yeah, and so basically all he did here then was just change the wording of something that's kind of been recognized, just been in practice, but just not necessarily, just to make it very clear.
Yeah.
And maybe stop confusion or stop, you know what I mean? So that's, and then from my understanding, from maybe some bishops or things that, or some groups that might hold firm to only men being able to read and stuff, or
That's right.
altar server. So this is just making it very clear across
the church.
this part is allowed.
Yes. Now here's the part that got a little people, because as soon as we were talking about the headlines, Pope allows, like it was the most basic way, Pope allows women to read or things like that. Ministries of lector and acolyte to
It
it.
was all over the place.
And people looked at these headlines as though here it is. Here is Pope Francis opening the doors of the priesthood to women. But it's very clear in Pope Francis's document, the Motu Proprio, which is called Spiritus Domini, that he says that he is not saying that he actually echoes the words of John Paul II that reserves the priesthood to men only, and not only reserving the priesthood to men only, but saying that the church has no authority to allow women to the priesthood. So people were disappointed that Pope Francis had not opened the door for this type of news, right?
From my understanding, in the past, like every single pope from John Paul II, Benedict, and even Pope Francis, has said the same thing when it comes to women priests, because it's only been the last so many years. I mean, I'm sure it's been a thing before that, but in the last couple of years, since it became a political thing for women to vote and all that kind of stuff, it became in the church the same. Okay, now the church needs to change. So what I think a lot of people don't understand or realize is, why is the priesthood reserved to men? Why can't women be priests? Now, we said they can do everything else in the church, but what is it that a priest is able to do that a woman cannot do? Let's take completely administration duties out of it, because you could hire an administrator for the church that runs the whole building for you and does everything, right? You could do that if we're in a big church. What is the ministerial duties that a priest can perform or do?
Yeah, and maybe since we're getting into this topic now, I would say it doesn't have anything to do with skill.
No, of course. Yeah.
Like I celebrate the sacraments and preach and all these things. Women can also. Women have the skill to do that. It has nothing to do with skill, okay? And in many ways, there are a lot of women who could do a much better job than me, but it has nothing to do with skill. The priesthood is, and I think we often forget about this, a priest, and it's easy to forget about this because we focus a lot on the human side of a priest, which is natural. That the priest is ordained in persona Christi.
What does that mean?
Which means he is in the person of Jesus. He stands in the person of Jesus. That's very hard for us to understand today because, I mean, you guys are friends with me. You don't see Jesus in me, probably, right?
Well, let's start with the beard there, I
see. Funny how it hasn't grown since last week.
Yeah.
But so that's hard for people to see. Like, this person right here is standing in the person of Jesus. But that's what the holy orders do at the ordination, that I'm in the person of Jesus first and foremost. That's when I stand and celebrate the sacraments. And in the person of Jesus, I take on sort of everything, right? In his humanity, in his maleness as well. That when I stand at the altar and say, "This is my body," we are affecting the sacrifice of the Mass in the person of Jesus, who was both God and man, right? Yeah. And so I just want to that's the first thing that I think that has to be said.
Can I ask then,
Sure.
Are you always in the persona Christi?
Am I always in the person
of Christ? Or is it during the sacraments?
Principally in the sacraments. And there's the word in persona Christi capitis, as Christ the head. Right? So definitely in the sacraments. Yeah. I mean, when I'm mowing my lawn.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah.
Were you thinking mowing lawn?
No. I was actually thinking yard work.
Snow.
I was thinking raking the lawn. But yeah.
It's like when people say, "Do you always wear your priest collar?" It's like, well, not when I mow my lawn or shovel the snow, right? But I do sleep in it. I'm just kidding. But okay, so that's first and foremost. Do you want to add to that?
There's a bunch to say about that. But and a really solid case can be made from kind of a phenomenological, philosophical standpoint when you're making these kind of theological distinctions. That it's like that there is an ontological difference between men and women. If a priest is to take on, the person of Christ, that there is that It makes sense that is done as a man, that there isn't that ontological shift between a man and a woman, because that would be like you can imagine, and I don't mean to burden this by philosophical language, but like we talk about like accidental and substantial differences, that like there are all kinds of situations that could be otherwise with me. Like I could change my job, I could change and these would be, and I could wake up and I would still be the same person with this slight variation. If I woke up as a woman, that would be a huge, like, startling, like, change for me, that, like, that would be kind of an ontological change that changes my fundamental identity as a person. So we can kind of cite that difference and say that in order for a priest to take on the person of Christ, to be in persona Christi, is in the actual ontological state of a man. But you can make kind of those precise theological, phenomenological kind of claims, but you still kind of have to wade through the way that people kind of want to talk about this. They want to talk about this in terms of patriarchy, in terms of hegemony, in terms of, patriarchal, hierarchical understandings of, a male-dominant kind of society, and that this is just another example of subordination of women. And you don't need to look too far into the history of the church to say that this doesn't really add up. Like, you look at the reverence that we give to Mary.
Yes.
That we have to be careful that we're, not elevating this person who is a woman kind of beyond.
Past the point.
Yeah, and we have, historically, we have doctors of the church that are women.
Yeah. Like
people whose teaching authority is so high that their, that their writings and their words are held in very, very high regard, that, have lived way before these sort of movements against kind of patriarchy, or against. So we need to not paint with broad strokes. We need to be able to have these kind of nuanced theological, philosophical
Sure, and
discussions.
on the same point that you're making, it's almost as if some people think, like, just because you're a man, you're eligible to be a priest.
Right.
Where it's like, that is not true at all. There are a lot of men who would make horrible priests, right? Just like there are men that make horrible whatever, And so just being a man is not a prerequisite to being a priest.
Yes, and if you want to kind of speak categorically, that it's like, you need to be a man in order to be a father. But,
but not all.
Not all. Yeah, all fathers are men, but not all men are fathers. And you can say that in kind of a literal sense. You can also say that in a figurative sense, that not all men kind of live up to what's required.
Here's what. So I always go back to John Paul II, St. John Paul II, because in 1994, I know that was 20.
I know. Don't say it. Don't say it.
27 years ago.
27 now. Yeah, 27 now.
But he released this papal document called Ordinatio Sacerdotalis on the priestly ordination, right? And it's a document called on reserving priestly ordination to men alone. It was released in May of 1994. And here's what Pope John Paul II wrote, okay? And I always come back to this document because this is sort of where John Paul II laid down the law, sort of, about this in a clear fashion. But here he says this, what you said: the fact that the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God and Mother of the Church, received neither the mission proper to the apostles nor the ministerial priesthood clearly shows that the non-admission of women to priestly ordination cannot mean that women are of a lesser dignity, nor can it be construed as discrimination against them. Rather, it is to be seen as the faithful observance of a plan to be ascribed to the wisdom of the Lord. And then I like this part. The presence and the role of women in the life and mission of the Church, although not linked to the ministerial priesthood, remain absolutely necessary and irreplaceable. I love that because it's so true. I mean, you look at, like, me as a pastor in a church. Yeah. I would be lost without women. The women of the parish are so good in being good advisors and really, feedback about stuff. The work they do in the parish, the ministry they do in the parish, the volunteer hours they do in the parish. I mean, they work harder than me, and it's beautiful. And it's true. It's necessary and it's irreplaceable.
Yeah. Even talking about, if we go up to the Vatican. Okay, so talking about some of the head, like the head of the. I can't remember one of the offices, the Office of Evangelization in New Evangelization in the Vatican, is a woman. Like she's the director of that office, and she speaks directly with the Pope. And so, like, realizing that all these special missions and jobs and directions and everything else, when it comes to a ministerial side of things, if it applies to lay people alone, yes, they're like women are there just with men. When it comes to specifically the ministry of a priest,
Right.
those are reserved to cardinals, to priests and bishops, and those types of things are put in those jobs. But that's because they are priests and they are. But like people that make decisions in the church all the way up have there are women all the way through the Vatican that help make defining decisions on ministry and things like that all the way through. It's not just a bunch of cranky old men that are sitting there debating something, right? And so knowing that like one of the people in this new evangelization, she has the ear of the Pope, and so like she is helping make change based on her position there. So realizing that that's not necessarily...
And I must say that Pope Francis has done a better job of including women in these, because I mean, sure, not always have women been appointed to these roles where they're quite eligible and welcomed to be in these positions. Pope Francis has done a good job of doing that, of balancing sort of the role of women in these different capacities, right? And I think it comes down to, let's remember about the difference between our call to be priests from our baptism and the call to be priests as a ministerial priest, as an ordained priest, right? And sort of a vocation is someone who is sort of set aside, not better, but set aside to do what God has called them to do. And we haven't even touched upon religious sisters and the fantastic ministry that they offer the church, the beautiful ministry that they offer the church.
Can I just say, where would the church be today in North America without religious sisters? I mean, you can't even go into the amazing work that they've done.
And a good way of putting it is like the leadership that's offered, that has been kind of offered by religious sisters historically, that it's the work that's done in education, and a lot of people will say, well, leadership, that if they take maybe issue with that, it's like they may be understanding things in a hierarchical way, or they don't necessarily see that as leadership. But if you have kind of a gospel perspective on, it's like the greatest among you will be as one who serves, and that should be our understanding of a priest, of anyone who's involved in a specific ministry. That it's not you're not placing the people who are the greatest in ministry are the ones who are placing themselves above other people. That look at Saint Teresa of Calcutta. It's that great an example of a woman changing the world. Through her vocation. Serve the poorest of the poor.
And like you said, so realizing that like the role of priesthood or whatever in the church is one of servant, of serving the people and being there for the parish and being there for anyone can do that, right? Anyone can serve the parish and anyone can be there. It's that's a great way. It's versus looking at it as like, oh, the priest gets to make the decision. You know what I mean? That's the position of power. Right. That's the worldly way of looking at something versus
true.
You know what I mean? Versus looking at it as a servant. Okay, this is the decision that I need to make for my people in this. As a servant, this is the best decision for. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think what's going to help is the more we explore gifts. I know locally in North Bay there was this exploring our gifts and how we can use them more. The more we can explore people's gifts, women who are great orators, preachers. There's lots of opportunity outside of a liturgical celebration where we can be people. Like I think of Matt's wife, Teresa Marie, for example, teaches our RCIA course. She's beautiful, and she the things she does. I mean, when we recognize the gifts we have, God has a place for us to use them, and that doesn't necessarily mean we have to be ordained to the priesthood. We have like 4 minutes left, but I have a spicy question for you. Okay,
fine.
So here it is, and don't take too long. Okay, so at the end of the document,
why'd you look at me for that?
At the end of the document of John Paul II, okay, it says, "I declare that the Church has no authority whatsoever to confer priestly ordination on women," and here it is, "and that this judgment is to be definitively held by all the Church's faithful." What do you say to people who say, "I don't agree with that"?
I guess you're not Catholic. Yeah. Well, only because you're not one of the, it's definitively held by all the church's faithful. So you're not one of the church's faithful.
Yeah, and just on a technical note, if you're reading an encyclical, if you're reading anything that's issued by the Vatican and it has that formulation, that you know, the Holy See defines and declares that that it is to be definitively held, that is automatically on the status of doctrine. I know we had a discussion earlier about
Yeah.
you know
Look at the doctrine
the levels of
podcast.
authority
Right.
that this judgment is to be definitively held, puts that at a level that's kind of beyond opinion. That it's not something that we can just kind of freely disagree with because it's about, you know, 17th century economics. They're like something that you can't just kind of dismiss because of context. The church holds a specific authority to make these kinds of declarations. So at kind of a church authority level, we do have to accept it. But I think that encyclical is a good example, but also just read just about anything by JP2. That his training, his philosophical training before he became Pope was in phenomenology. If you read kind of theology of the body, you read these things, that he's not just I'm declaring things dogmatically or doctrinally.
Yes.
He lays a groundwork for the scientific, philosophical, theological justification for these ideas, that if you're interested in these things beyond the level of just kind of politics or power plays, that he makes a good case and declares doctrinally, so that it's you can have some kind of informed suspicion of that, but investigate it further.
And we talked about dogma, doctrine, and discipline. Discipline, you don't have to believe in to be Catholic, but doctrine and dogma dogma is words right from God, whereas in the doctrinal. So if this is doctrine, it's something that won't change. Our understanding of it will change, but not necessarily the word, not the idea of what is being placed there, right?
Yeah, and I think that's an important keynote to end with, is that when JP2 says the church has no authority to change it, she doesn't have the authority to change this because it was instituted by Jesus.
Yeah.
And when something is instituted by Jesus, we fail to be the church that Jesus made, that set out, when we start changing what he said. And if you look at our history, the tradition, the magisterium, all these things, everything, we've upheld Jesus' teaching for 2,000 years, right? Where other sort of churches have not.
Yep.
And that's sort of the...
You can't say that Jesus wouldn't have made Mary Magdalene a priest, or given that to Mary Magdalene or his mother Mary, or he went against what was done all the time. In his age, he did things against tradition 100% of the time, all the time.
And to clarify on what you
time.
said too, what happens if someone doesn't believe?
Yeah.
Something that JP2 has said that has to be definitively held by all the church's faithful. It's okay to struggle with a church's teaching.
100%.
But we have to also accept this is the church's teaching.
Yeah.
Where can I grow in my understanding of this? Okay, so how can I really grow to understand this more? There's a difference between not agreeing and trying to understand,
and struggling with it,
where the church is struggling with it, and then there's a difference between sort of the groups who are really
against it,
fighting and I guess that will go in another episode maybe. Different groups who are really combating that teaching, and but it's okay to struggle. I mean, there are many church teachings we struggle with because we're trying to come to a better understanding of what God has.
God's people were named the Israelites. Israelites meant struggling with God. That's what the core foundation. So the Israelites struggled with God, God's people. He chose them as his people. So it's okay to struggle and to wrestle with God.
Yeah. We just hope to come, instead of staying stuck in our struggle, to come to a better understanding of why God has set this out this way.
If you have a problem with it, I'm going to say every morning wake up and say, Lord Jesus, I struggle with this. I give it to you. And then let him introduce things into your life to help you accept it, or help you to maybe get some clarification on the matter, or even just come to terms with your heart. If I struggle with something really bad, especially something the church teaches, or something that and I know that this is the way that God wants it to be, but I don't agree with it, that's what I do. I pray in my morning prayer, okay, Lord, I'm really struggling with this concept specifically. I give it to you. help me. I don't agree with it in my mind. So I know that as a Catholic or as a Christian, like this is what I'm supposed to believe. Then I give it to you every day. And then eventually, what's really cool is it's amazing the different things that he works into your regular life to help steer you to the understanding that he wants you to have of it. It's amazing. It's great.
On that note, we are way over time, and
good topic, though.
We should have done a double episode on this topic, maybe, because there's still lots more to say. But if people have questions or clarifications or comments for us, please email them to thecatholicbuzzpodcast@gmail.com, and we will do our best to answer them as best as we can. And for Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, my name is Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.